Hello and welcome back to Grand Old Team episode 4. You're tuned into the Celtic Way with the Celtic Way's version of Hinge and Bracket, staring back at you in the screen, and that is of course Tony Haggerty, i.e. Haggerty10 on the X handle, Twitter handle, whatever you call it, and the irrepressible and wonderful Kevin McKenna. How are you, Kevin? We're back again.
Good morning. Good morning.
You know, the public gets what the public wants, indeed. Now, this is episode 4 of Grand Old Team, and we'll call today's great players who have faced Celtic. And I just spoke off air before we came on, and I said to Kevin, probably go down a few rabbit holes here. And if you're getting involved in the comment section, you can throw in your own great players as well. Now, we've not limited it to European football, to domestic football as well, Kevin, but I'll bow to you and give you the first shout. The floor is yours, sir. You can tell me who the first person who makes your Hall of Fame in terms of great players who have played against Celtic.
Well, I'll mention a few because
Go on.
One of the consolations, I think, of our patchy record in Europe, especially in recent years, is once you've accepted that you're not going to win this game, or you're unlikely to, sometimes you can just sit back and watch how the great players go about their business. And me being a super optimist, I then begin to think it'd be great if some of our players, having had the experience of coming up against these players and how they go about their business, how they move the ball, their technique, it will rub off on us. And although there's games that will struggle in Europe because, let's be frank here, we don't get sustained stiff opposition of a technically high standard in Scotland all that often. But the experience of playing at that very top level, at that speed, demanding that level of technical know-how, I think has contributed greatly to our dominance in Scotland over the last 15, 20 years. I've seen Johan Cruyff, privileged to see Johan Cruyff. I loved Johan Cruyff. He was my first overseas hero. I remember getting a Barcelona top when he joined Barcelona when I was about 11 or 12. I've seen Kaká, I've seen Ronaldinho, Messi, Ronaldo.
George Best. You'll have seen George Best as well.
I didn't know. Well, no, I saw George Best play against Celtic for Hibs.
Yeah.
I saw him score a screamer against us.
Yes. Peter Latchford actually saved that, but it was about 14 yards behind the goal line. Such a shot.
It was just great. It was great to see George Best. But in recent years, the last 10, 15 years ago, there's one outstanding performance that tends to get overlooked when talking about great players that have pitched up at Parkhead, and that was Riquelme, the wee Argentinian playmaker who played for Villarreal against us in 2004, I think, the year after Seville. We drew 1 each with them at Parkhead, and they beat us 2-0 in Spain. It was an excellent game. But, Villarreal, we were thinking probably, they're not one of the household names in Spanish football. We've got a wee chance here. But my God, that Riquelme was just different class. He was everywhere. He had that kind of stocky, hard trunk. You no matter how hard you tackled him, you were just bouncing off him. He had a great range of passing. He did that wee kind of Spanish Latino thing of pirouetting away from tackles.
I remember that, Kevin, because I remember thinking they need another ball on the park here for Celtic to get a kick. Because whenever he had it, he seemed to have it for an eternity, didn't he?
And the kind of player that kind of matched that recently was was Luka Modric a couple of years ago for Real Madrid. Again, we're all thinking he's over the hill, and he's not going to be able to last the full game, and he'll be playing in a withdrawing position. No, no. But Celtic have. I was just looking at this. Of the last 6 or 7 European Players of the Year, the Ballon d'Or,
yes,
all of them have played at Celtic Park.
yeah.
So that's Kaká with AC Milan, Ronaldo with Manchester United, Messi with Barcelona, Modric with Real Madrid, Benzema, who come on as a sub for Real Madrid. I'm not sure about Cannavaro, but Ronaldinho, who won it in 2005, and Pavel Nedved.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that they just trip off the tongue, don't they? They're excellent players. But even going further back, the likes of Gianni Rivera playing for Milan against Celtic, Eusebio playing for Benfica against Celtic. Older people will be, that's just before my time, but lots of people love the likes of Gianni Rivera and Eusebio, because they recognise class when they see it, Kevin. When the Celtic supporters have all, as you say, if there's one consolation, if you're not going to win the game, then you appreciate talent when it's on your doorstep.
Yeah, my dad raved about seeing Eusebio in 1970.
Yeah.
And he also had a great deal of admiration for Gianni Rivera, who played for AC Milan in '69.
Yeah.
That was an interesting. I mean, I know it's maybe going back in ancient history in terms of some of our younger listeners, but there was a clue as to Celtic's greatness in that kind of 5-year period, 6-year period between 66 and 72. So Milan drew us in the quarter-final after we'd beaten St Etienne and Red Star Belgrade, which were like 2 of the stiffest first and second round ties going. And the Milan, the Italian press and the Milan manager were like, God, anybody but Celtic, for that draw, because Celtic were genuinely regarded as the favourites.
World-class team. Yeah.
And when we drew nothing each in Italy, quite comfortably by all accounts, at the San Siro, everyone just accepted not only would Celtic win the tie overall, especially the way that they played against Inter Milan 2 years previously, but they were posted as genuine, almost runaway favourites for the European Cup that year. And Milan came, put up the shutters, played very well, beat us 1-0 at Parkhead, no complaints, and then beat Ajax 4-0 easily in the final.
Yeah. And
the Milan manager and various players since there have said, Celtic were by far the toughest team we faced. The same thing happened 2 years later in 1971 when we played Ajax, who were then becoming brilliant. And, we were beaten 3-0 over there and could only win 1-0 at Hampden. That was the only defeat Ajax suffered. And again, Johan Cruyff and others in the Dutch camp said, and this was a Celtic team that was reckoned to be already being in decline after 67. But again, that mighty Ajax team thought that Celtic were one of their toughest opponents in those 3 years when they won three European Cups in a row.
Talking about Rivera, you will have watched it and seen it many years ago. There's a great documentary that BBC did about Scottish football. It's called Only a Game.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember it. And then they had like the club, the player, the manager. They did it that way. And the player, and Billy Bremner tells a fantastic story about Gianni Rivera. Scotland played Italy 65. John Gregg scored the winner. Scotland won 1-0. But before the game, the teams go up. Jim Baxter, Rivera. I'll revere him. He says, they go out in the park, and for the first 20 minutes, Billy Bremner didn't want to touch the ball because he was killing himself laughing. He kept saying to Baxter, don't stop it, because all I could hear is, that's one, that's two. Jim Baxter was sticking the ball through Rivera's legs, and he was like counting the nutmegs and stuff, and because he was just like that. It was just typical Slim Jim in the way he played. And Billy Bremner said he was sensational that night. Scotland were brilliant that night. And we're talking about a lot of foreign players, but I said to you off air, I just lament the fact that I never saw Baxter play as a domestic player that played against Celtic. He was. My father tells me that early 60s Rangers team was brilliant with Baxter and Brand and Wilson and all that. And and the more I read about him, the more I hear about him. And I saw him on that documentary, and he was killing himself laughing. And he was asked about Celtic winning the European Cup, and he said a great line that stuck with me forever. He said, Celtic winning the European Cup, and he said to the guy, it was great, son. He says, unfashionable boys who'd spun round clothes poles had done a number on the catwalk kings of Europe. He said, brilliant. And I thought, what a way to put it. Unfashionable boys who'd spun round clothes poles.
Why wasn't he working as a Daily Records sports sub-editor with lines like that?
I mean, just, and I just thought, brilliant. And my father, I doff my cap to his knowledge about football, but he said he was like arguably the best domestic player that has ever played against Celtic. But I guess that's open to question, isn't it?
Well, there's another interesting point about that era. So in the Celtic 9 in a row era, although it speaks of dominance, we won the 9 titles, we won the Scottish Cup, 65, 67, 69, 71, 72, 74. A European Cup final, 2 semi-finals. So yeah, it does speak of dominance, but those who were around at that time will tell you that Rangers team, for most of those years, would have been capable of beating most of the opponents that Celtic faced in Europe. They were that good.
Yeah.
And I think, and I've heard a couple of former Celtic players from that time say that the fact that Rangers were so good helped them when they played top teams in Europe. And occasionally, you'll get newspaper columnists, people online who will attempt to compare Celtic's 9 in a row team between 65 and 74 and Rangers between 89 and 97. And there is no comparison because when Rangers won their 9 in a row, Celtic were probably in the worst possible state, the worst condition they'd been since, arguably since the Second World War.
Yeah.
I'm not taking away, you still have to win it, but they were up against a very, very average Celtic team.
Yeah.
Whereas when Celtic won 9 in a row, they had to overcome a very powerful Rangers team, but also by turns an excellent Hibs team, an excellent Aberdeen team, and then clubs like Dunfermline and Kilmarnock who were getting to the semi-final, Hearts, Dundee rather, who were getting to the semi-finals, European trophies, or beating English clubs in the old Pearse Cup.
Yeah, I mean, so I was just kind of putting that kind of domestic slant on, but most of the great players that you've seen have been in the European arena, haven't they? We spoke in the last episode. We spoke about Real Madrid, we spoke about Ajax, we spoke about Juventus and stuff like that. And from my memories, I remember seeing Stefan Chapuisat and Michael Zorc battering Celtic at Celtic Park. For Dortmund, early 90s.
Yeah.
They were terrific.
Chapuisat was a cracking player.
He was great, wasn't he? The Swiss striker, guys like that. And then moving further forward in the 90s, that Paris Saint-Germain team that destroyed Tommy Burns' team, and Tommy Burns were an all-out attacking rip-roaring, free-scoring, never boring, and Paris Saint-Germain came and absolutely annihilated them.
Somebody was talking to me about that game. I was there too. To my shame, I was so pissed off with Celtic being so easily dismantled. I didn't really hang around for much of the second half. I think PSG were already 3 up by then, but somebody was saying this, and it was kind of partly in tribute to Tommy and partly in exasperation that, you know, we had at our disposal Andres, Tom, Di Canio, Van Hooijdonk and Cadetti. And he said it was like Tommy just sat down, saw these 4 amazing strikers and thought, what can go wrong if we play them all? You know, we're bound to get a couple.
Yeah.
But, you know, it doesn't really work like that.
Tommy, the jumpers for goalposts ethos, wasn't it? A 10-21er or a 7-15er, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter how many goals. But, I mean, that's arguably, in my lifetime, one of the best European performances I've seen at Celtic Park. Bernard Lamar, Rai, the Brazilian, Vincent Guerin, who ended up signing for Hearts, Yuri Djorkaeff, Patrice Loco. Stefan Mai actually played for PSG that night. They were terrific and dismantled Celtic. You have to say they absolutely battered them. But, I just... And the Celtic fans clapped at the end because that's all you could do. They've clapped various opponents off the park, but that night in unison, they were just like, you'd off your cap to a team who came and, beat you, routinely beat you fair and square. When you thought you'd a fighting chance because you'd only lost 1-0 in Paris and thought, you know what, fighting chance, Big Pierre missed a sitter in that game because he gave it the old, it get caught in the stadium floodlights, didn't he, when he went to header it, and he says he looked up and the light shone. Just like, just admit you made a cod it, big man. There's no shame, But it's amazing. I mean, sometimes the mind does play tricks. But great teams and great players when you see them. That Juventus team that came and Celtic beat 4-3 under Martin O'Neill's era. I mean, Trezeguet scored an absolute beauty that night. Real daisy cutter, and Trezeguet's playing, Del Piero's playing, Nedved's playing. That team was star-studded. Celtic still beat them. Incredible, one of the great nights at Celtic Park.
See, that was in an era, I think, where there was an era probably that ended round about 2012, 2013, when the concept of super clubs, and you've heard me talk about this before.
Yeah.
What wasn't yet in existence. So, you had these really powerful, great European teams, but they didn't yet have the fabulous riches where to the extent where the element of competition is ridiculed.
You had a fighting chance against them, didn't you, in these ties?
Hence why we beat Barcelona, Juventus, and so you could measure yourself against them, and you could see what could be done with good tactical nous and hard professional players, who are not going to be easily awed. I loved one of my European folk heroes is Carles Puyol, the legendary captain of Barcelona. I just loved everything about that big guy. His long, hippie rock and roll, heavy metal lead singer look. He was like he was a double for Sammy Hagar, and he took no prisoners, and that included his own players, because there's that wonderful footage of him that crops up on social media occasionally of him kind of just chivying his own Barcelona players who were getting over elaborate in their celebrations, or if they were diving about too much. But I saw them play and Aidan McGeady was up against them, and McGeady and him had a great battle, and it showed me, there was some performances of McGeady's in Europe, including that one. There was one against Benfica, there was one against Milan, there was one against Shakhtar Donetsk, where I thought we're watching a homegrown world-class player here, but watching the way that he and Puyol played was just great. There was one point, I think, not long after the start of the second half, and they'd obviously targeted McGeady, and they'd obviously been discussing McGeady in the dressing room, and they'd been told, right, you need to watch this wee guy. You need to take care of him, because he's making us look like arses, some of us. And I think, and McGeady went chasing a long ball out near the touchline at the old main stand side, and Puyol just came at him like a charging rhino and put him into the sand. And but fair play to McGeady. McGeady was a brave player. You never saw him rolling about. And I thought, for technical know-how, his technical ability against opponents like that, I thought, Aidan was potentially one of a handful of Scottish players who had, who had world-class skills, and it kind of pains me when I hear Celtic supporters subscribe to this contrived notion of the what is it they call it? It first started airing in Sky News about his final delivery. I think this is nonsense. I've never seen a player lay on so many goals. Split defences with passing, and they're saying, "Oh, there's no end product." And too many Celtic fans have subscribed to that. That McGeady was a show pony. He wasn't. He was as brave as a lion, scored some great goals, set up other brilliant ones, and was one of a handful in the last 10 years of homegrown Scots who could hold their own against the world's best.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, without a doubt. You spoke about that game. You spoke about the Juventus game. I don't know if you've watched the Juventus game back. You will have, but Archie was in some form that night. Archie McPherson, he was just he surpassed himself at one point. I think it's just before Valharan equalises, and Lubomir Moravcik spots the ball down, and Archie's giving it the big one, isn't he? He's like, Lubomir Moravcik, nobody hits a dead ball like Lubomir Moravcik. And then there's a pause, and somebody's went, Archie, and he's went, except Del Piero, of course, who's given Juventus the lead with a wonderful free kick into the top corner. It's absolutely priceless, because Del Piero is bound a beauty, right? An absolute screamer. And then at one point in the second half, he's given it, Lambert. No, sorry, that's Eget. Can you get them confused, Archie? It's a priceless game, that, and the footage is great, and there's some wonderful world-class players on display that night. Absolutely proud. But I even remember, Kevin, Boxing Day, 88.
Right, Red Star Belgrade, you're going to say, aren't you?
Dragan Stojkovic, and then he became the hacking yakking of his day, because Celtic were always going to sign Dragan Stojkovic, and he was brilliant. And that was one of the friendly matches that wasn't played like a friendly. It was a real kind of...
It was 2 each, I think, wasn't it?
2 each it finished, and everybody just marvelled at Stojkovic and thought,
what a player.
I mean, he was terrific. Absolutely terrific. And every time I heard Celtic linked with him or mentioned it, he was one of those players you were just praying, oh, please, sign them. But many links, but it never came to fruition. But again, I think I was there that day. It was 26,000 there that day. It was a wet Boxing Day, but for those who were there, they were treated to something special that day, watching a player like that.
Yeah. I'm quite partial to the old Eastern European teams. Red Star Belgrade been one of them whom we beat 5-1. The famous Jimmy Johnstone. I'm no flying. I always got the feeling that some of the great Eastern European players never really got their due recognition, simply because in the Soviet era, and also the era before mass media, they weren't as sexy as Western-based players playing in Spain, Italy, and England. Because we also hosted Joseph Masopoulos, the great Czechoslovakian, who won the European Player of the Year award in '62, I think. And then it was Florian Albert. I don't know if he played against us. Yeah, he won it in '67. Although, again, I've got to say this. I know it's going off, it's going off at a tangent. But in '67, I think Jimmy Johnstone came third.
He was third. I got the bronze, but didn't he, after such a thing?
And there's a theory, which I subscribe to, of course, which is Jimmy Johnstone should have won it that year.
Yeah,
because they didn't name the European Player of the Year until later in the year, so there was plenty of time to digest the full season. So Jimmy Johnstone is the star player for the team that has won the European Cup, playing with the most verve and flair since the great Real Madrid team. So he should be winning it, given his performances against top teams. But there's a theory that the English, the judges at that time, it wasn't as democratic a decision. The English football writers were disproportionately overrepresented amongst the voting panels that voted in those days for the winner of the Ballon d'Or. And there were certain sections, not by no means all, but certain sections of the English footballing elite who really resented the fact that Celtic had succeeded where Manchester United and Liverpool had failed in not only getting to the final of the European Cup, but winning it. And that they were determined to ensure that, Jimmy Johnstone wouldn't win the Ballon d'Or when across Europe, they were marveling at his skills. And it also came to the fore a few months later when we played Racing Club of Argentina in that infamous World Cup. And the BBC in particular revelled in showing footage of Celtic players' malfeasances, shall we call them, against the Argentinians in the third game, especially when they decided, right, enough's enough. We're not getting out of here with that trophy. We've let them get away with it for too long. Sleeves up, let's get stuck in. Which I was actually, looking back, I'm thinking, yeah, that's fair enough. They represented me properly there. But the BBC just loved, my dad was really bitter about the BBC's coverage then. Just loved to portray Celtic as these thugs with no context of what had happened in the previous two games.
It's funny you mentioned about Jimmy Johnstone not getting the Ballon d'Or or the Golden Boot, whatever you want to call it. Because Florian Albert must have been some footballer, right?
Mm.
I've never seen any footage of Florian Albert ever in that season where he won the European Footballer of the Year. And I could not pick Florian Albert out in an ID parade. I know various Hungarian players who played in the past, but I could not. I have never seen any footage of Florian Albert in action for me to say he was better than Jimmy Johnstone that year. So it's there's a real plausibility in what you say there, Kevin. There has to be.
Bern Suarez were a mighty European team. They won the Cup Winners' Cup in. No, they won the Old Fairs Cup in '65. They beat Juventus in '65. Yeah. Hungarian football had been brilliant. They got to the '54 World Cup final. The mighty Magyars. You had Puskás. They were the first team to beat England at Wembley. But those were in the '50s and mid '60s. They were kind of in decline. I'm told. When you see biographies of Albert, you realise he's a top player. But as you said,
I'm not disputing that. That's correct. But you're talking about that Red Star Belgrade team that Stojkovic played for. 3 years later, they go on and they win the European Cup.
That's right. One of the most boring European Cup finals.
Brutal. And funnily enough, Stojkovic is playing for Marseille. He comes on as a substitute.
That's right. Yeah.
There's a quirk of fate. Chris Waddle also playing for Marseille. But that team, they destroy Rangers at Ibrox, and I'm always attracted to forward players. And Darko Panchev scored the beauty. And to this day, one of my private email addresses is the first name on it is Darko. And I always said if I had a son, I was going to call him Darko. And my mother and father like, don't be so silly. And he ended up going to Milan, and it never worked out for him. But that was a wonderful team. Prosinecki played, and I think Prosinecki also played for Dynamo Zagreb when they played Celtic, didn't he?
Yeah.
Strong Celtic. I think Mark Viduka was playing for Zagreb that night. And Prosinecki was another player who was terrific and constantly linked with a move to Celtic. Never ever came off. But these guys were great. I love Stojkovic, I love Prosinecki, as you say. The Eastern European football, had a real high, and they produced some wonderful, wonderful players.
Yeah, they were nobody's mugs. They were hard. They'd all this skill, but they were teak tough. You didn't mess with them. In the Soviet era, they saw football as a project, and their academies, were like extensions of their military training camps.
Yes.
And I think they were harshly judged by that. They were always described as, no nonsense, disciplined, doer. And you think, no, they're not. They're anything but. They're absolutely wonderful. They've got some amazing strips, great artwork, great footwork. It actually said good things about the Soviet system.
Even the Dynamo Kiev team that beat Celtic in '86, like, they had blocking in it, didn't they? Like blocking, Kuznetsov, Baltacha, guys like that, and who became household names in football.
Well, I saw Gary Lineker recently. The BBC does that top 10 categories, which I love all that, right?
Yeah.
And I know everyone's got their views about Lineker. I quite like listening to him talking about football because he's been there, seen it, done it, knows everybody. I'll listen to his anecdotes all the time. But there was in 1986, one of that Dynamo Kiev team was their wee bald winger, Belanov.
Oh, probably.
He looked like a wee school janitor. So he wins the European Player of the Year. So just as I'm talking about how Jimmy Johnstone was passed over for Florian Albert in '67, so Gary Lineker was bewailing the fact, like, it obviously still hurt him many years later. So in 1986, Lineker had been top scorer at the World Cup in Mexico in '86, and he was at the top of his game. He scored that great goal against Germany 4 years later in the semi-final. So Lineker says he thought he had a real cracking chance at winning the Ballon d'Or in '86, but he didn't. It was this wee baldy janitor from the Soviet Union called Igor Belanov, and Lineker just was, wasn't happy about this. He was trying not to be, disrespectful of a fellow pro, but you could tell what's going on here. I've won the Golden Boot in the World Cup. I'm Gary Lineker. Everyone knows me. But this wee guy wins it. And he may have been right. Lineker, he may have been right. I think he was runner. He must have been runner-up then.
Yeah, of course.
There weren't all that many. There's not that many English players who've won European Player of the Year.
No. Keegan won
Belanov, but I saw Belanov and his mates playing in '86, and I saw him play for Soviet Union. Unlike Lauren Albert, we saw loads of him. He was a great wee player, absolutely outstanding.
Yeah,
that
they were a good side. That Dino Care side were a good side. And
again, we drew one from at Parkhead, and it was eeksy peeksy. And then we were I'm not saying unlucky, but we gave a right good account of ourselves in that second leg in Kiev.
Yeah, 100,000 by the way. Proud of 100,000. But yeah, I mean, it's just amazing how you kind of flick through the Rolodex in your Celtic mind, don't you, about great games and great teams that have played at Celtic. I mean, the Milan team that had Maldini and all that in it as well, Kaka and stuff like that. I mean, they were Ronaldinho, they were terrific, weren't they?
Pirlo was my...
Pirlo.
I mean, you just want, if you could be any player. I mean, this is...
he was the epitome of cool.
It was just... you just wanted to be him, He was a Brad Pitt of... he looked as if he was just playing he'd be playing at the very highest level. He was just strolling about.
Yeah.
And he's pinging these 40, 50-yard passes. And he looks like a kind of David Ginola. He looked like a bit of a show pony. But I remember the last time we played Juventus at Parkhead, and Scott Brown was up against him. And Brown... was trying to put the clamps on him. He was hitting him with everything, bulldozing tackles, trying to bully him. Obviously, they targeted Pirlo, and Bruni's obviously been told, right, do a number on him. And every time he did, like, Pirlo just wouldn't flinch. He never even, I don't think he was ever put in the ground.
Yeah.
Bruni was just bouncing off him. And all you got from Pirlo was a kind of mild look of exasperation. Like, aren't we all playing the beautiful game here? Come on.
And it's funny because, I mean, it's not Celtic related per se, but I'm on the internet, and because you look at certain things, it spits up certain things. And yesterday, and I hadn't really seen the footage, it spat up Valencia when they went to Ibrox. Ibrox was getting done at the time, and they beat Rangers 3-1. And
Mario Kempis,
Bonoff and Kempis, and they went on to win the Cup Winners' Cup that year. I remember that final when Graham Rix missed a penalty, and Arsenal, another boring final, 0-0 went to penalties. But you just marvel at how great these guys were. And they're stripping their stuff in Glasgow, and that's the year after Maradona scored his first goal against Scotland at Hampden. You just, wow, this guy's just another planet, And Kempis and Bonoff that night at Ibrox were fantastic. I say it was just a few minutes of footage, but it kind of makes you, not because of the score, but because you want to see more of them. You think that was a truly great team as well, with some wonderful players. And you just have to turn around at times and just go, do you know what? Clap. It's just like there's nothing you can do about it. These guys are good. They're going to show you how good. And if you're a connoisseur or an aficionado of football, you'll enjoy it in the process. I know they're sticking a knife into your team, but you have to turn around and just say, keys, this is actually, I know my team's getting beat, but there's a perverse enjoyment, a macabre enjoyment about the fact that they're playing football the way you'd love to see your own team play it.
We're going to get accused by some, and maybe with some justification, because there's this concept which I'm not unsympathetic to, that in recent years the world's top players have turned up at Parkhead and treated it as like a tourist destination. They take in the sights, the sounds, the fury, the atmosphere. They post links to it in their social media accounts with wee kind of applause emojis, and then speak in glowing terms about pleasure of visiting Celtic Park. Once they've safely left for the points, right enough.
Once she good looking, and took.
And there's this kind of concept that too many of our fans are just we're kind of happy. It's always like a nice consolation when they say nice things about us. It would be better if we were brutal and actually took the points. And I do have some sympathy from that. Especially, I remember seeing Arjen Robben depart the field for Bayern Munich, and he got a round of applause. And Robben was genuinely moved at this, because in all the years that he'd played at the top level, he'd never had this reception. And he was a difficult wee sod to like, Robben. I want to just kick his behind. I wish somebody would. But I think there's room to kind of reflect and look at, just as you said, just appreciate what we were privileged to see. So Celtic, we do have privileges because we're at the top of Scottish football. Our fan base, its financial weight behind it, the Irish diaspora, Fergus McCann's vision, which left us that amazing stadium, 60,000 season ticket holders. But we should appreciate this other privilege that it gives us, which is the privilege of being drawn routinely against top teams and seeing the planet's very, very best players. And it's possible to admire that and to treasure that, while at the same time lamenting the fact that
it never grows old for me. But I despair at my own team's failings at those, at that level. But I get why. You've touched on it before. Back then, you were going toe to toe with them, and you pulled off the odd result, like dumping Ajax out and stuff like that, and beating Juventus at home, and that kind of stuff, beating Barcelona. But I just think, why do you enjoy football? To see top players perform and do their thing. And when you go to Celtic Park, you'll be entertained more than half the time it's by your own team, because they're domestically dominant, and when they went into the European arena, they could hold their own. Latterly, you see, I hate that whole tourist destination thing about Celtic Park. It really grinds my gears, and I hate it when world-class players post those kind of things, because I don't want it to be like that. I want to, as you say, I want to give them a punch in the dish. You know what I mean? So that when they start all that and they say lovely things, it's great, but I just find it patronising in the extreme, and I want Celtic to get back to some kind of. I want Brendan Rodgers, if he's the manager, to restore that kind of. It's battered pride, I think, we've got, and prestige and honour in Europe. You are trading on a former reputation, and I want that to change, and I want it to change soon. But it doesn't stop me from enjoying good teams or seeing good players when they come.
So I'm going to put you in the spot. I want you to give me 5. I wouldn't say your top 5, but 5 of your most outstanding overseas players you've seen.
Okay. Has to be Stojkovic, Prosinecki, Pirlo, Messi, and in fact, you say them, Riquelme, of performers, yeah, that would probably be in some kind of scrambled order in my top 5. I would maybe reject that or rethink that at some point, but off the top of my head, that's players who I've really admired when they've started their stuff at Celtic Park. I played against Celtic.
Who would my 5 be? God, there's dozens. I've got to say Cruyff.
Yeah, I suppose.
I've got to say Cruyff just because I worshipped that guy.
Yeah.
Obviously. Pirlo. Ronaldinho. Modric.
Yeah. I'd probably put Cruyff.
You could do a top 20. I mean, another guy that I thought was outstanding against us was Laurie Cunningham.
Yeah. You certainly get a top 10 out of it. Easy. As you say, you could probably stretch to 20 as well. And as I say, other people will remember Rivera and Eusebio and these guys, so they would probably have them in their side and possibly even older, other players from the great teams that Celtic played in the 60s. So it's all very subjective, isn't it? But a lot of it the now's probably there's a lot of recency bias, isn't there, with things like this?
Of course, yeah, I know.
So, but that's why we did this, because we tried to jog memories from people that are our age, maybe older, and have even greater Celtic memories that's extended out. It's not since the Sky cameras rolled in to cover football, basically. That's what I'm trying to say there, But I think it's a great talker, isn't it? Because everybody's opinion on players will be vastly different.
Yeah, and we all like to think that we're connoisseurs of the game beyond our shores, don't we?
We like to think that. Indeed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's been episode 4 of Grand Old Team. Really enjoyed that because we didn't pick a specific incident this week. More of a kind of all-round thing, which was great, but it doesn't half jog the memory, doesn't it? And you think, because I don't know about you, but I can just picture myself being at Celtic Park on Boxing Day '88 and seeing Stojkovic. I can see it now and marvel at that. He's good. And as you say, Cruyff and all that kind of stuff, and Riquelme, I can picture Riquelme doing the pirouette. And it's that great Davy Provan line, isn't it? You could keep a beach ball off you in a telephone box. It's a wonderful line. Riquelme was doing that to the Celtic players by the barrel when he played. But yeah. But Kevin, thanks very much. Always appreciate it. It's always the quickest time of the week. Always the quickest hour.
Always a pleasure. Never a chore.
Indeed. We'll be back next week, no doubt, on Grand Old Team to talk about something else. That's if you allow us and you keep saying the wonderful, lovely things that you do. We appreciate your input, guys, as well, when you're on the comment section. So thank you for all that. And if I just direct you to the bottom, you've got a limited chance to subscribe to the Celtic Way website. Costs you £12 for 12 months of access to top quality journalism on the website, covering the club you love. And there's something there for everybody if you visit www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, guys. We'd appreciate that. Kevin, thank you very much. Grand Old Team episode 4. We're churning them out here, sir.
All the best, Tony.
Take care, guys. We'll see you soon.